Alright, so when the process completes with the etcher, it'll say flash complete, one successful target, and so you're all set to go with that. At that point, you can go ahead and close it, and then your drive should be set up to, your USB thumb drive should be set up to go as an actual bootable Linux distribution, with whatever version that you've downloaded and set up. At this point, you don't necessarily need the setup file for Etcher, so you can delete that if you need this space. And the Linux Mint ISO, it may be handy to keep around just so you don't have to re-download such a big file again, but if that's not of a concern to you, you can delete that as well at this point because it's already copied over to your flash drive, and you should be ready to go with that. Now, one thing to consider is in the event you can't use a USB stick or you prefer to try to use the DVD, you can also do that as well, but you would still need to keep your ISO file handy if you were going to do that. But all you have to do is right click on it, and you'll see this burn disk image option. And if you go ahead and click that, it'll say, do you want to open this file? And it'll say it's an unknown publisher, and and it'll say, well, files from the internet can be useful. This file type can potentially harm your computer. It'll be okay. Just hit open in this case. It's not a virus or anything. And then if you do have a DVD burner on, or a Blu-ray burner or whatever, but you need at least a blank DVD. They're too big. The file's too big to fit on a CD. So if all you have is a CD burner and it's a really old computer, and you don't have any way to get, even a DVD burner into that computer, then you might be out of luck with that option because it has to at least be a DVD. That it's too big of a file to fit on a CD. So, but the likelihood that you can't at least get a DVD burner going is really slim. But anyway, so from here, it'll ask for your disk burner drive, and it'll show the ISO. Start bringing the disk image, click burn, and then you do want to do this verify disk after burning option. And then so you would put a blank DVD into your DVD burner or your Blu-ray burner or whatever, and then click this verify disk button, click the burn button, and it would basically put this ISO disk file onto that disk, and you would be able to then insert that disk into whatever computer you're trying to install Linux Mint onto, and it would work off of that. But the disadvantage to doing that, there's quite a few disadvantages to doing it that way with the disk. But one thing is that the discs are typically, the DVDs and things like that are typically, you can only write one time to them, and then that's it. There are some rewritable discs, of course, but even then, that's not that common anymore. You can still find blank DVDs and things like that in stores, but they're a rarity nowadays because the technology has progressed so much further to the point where they're fairly outdated. Even trying to use them for, I'm gonna, make a copy of my DVD for personal use or whatever. Even for that, you these days you're just better off taking it off the DVD and using it as a video file on your computer or whatever. So their uses are very very small these days, but it is still one viable option. And for some computers, especially older computers, it may be the only realistic option that you've got. So it is there for those that need it. But most people will be using the USB sticks these days. And that's a lot better because then, you can just use a small stick if you have one that's not, that you don't need to use for anything else. Or potentially, if once you've got it installed, if you don't need the installation stuff anymore, you can just delete it off of the USB stick, and use that drive for, use the storage drive for other purposes after that. So, which you can't really do on a DVD. Once it's burned on a DVD, then that's it. That's all. You can't, write more data onto it and erase data off of it very easily. So there is that. So once you've got that going on, it says boot Linux Mint. It says now that you have the USB stick or DVD, boot the computer from it. So first you would have to insert it into your computer and then restart the computer. So that's an important step because the USB stick or the DVD needs to be accessed as you are first starting up your computer. And there's no way to do that really until you've already started the computer once. So it says before your computer boots your current operating system, Windows, Mac, or Linux, you should see your BIOS loading screen. Check the screen or your computer's documentation to know which key to press and instruct your computer to boot on USB or DVD. So it'll go through those steps more clearly, but basically what it's saying is that by default a lot of computers will just boot from their internal storage drive because that's the normal behavior. But in this case, you actually want to tell it to boot off of either your USB stick or your DVD that you burn the ISO file onto. You want those to take priority in this case because you want to load the operating system from there for Linux the first time before you go to install it. And then once you install it, you would install it on the internal hard drive, internal storage, and then the boot priority can just go off of that, and it would be fine. But for the initial installation process, you do have to have the priority be either USB or the DVD drive. And you'll see that screen like when you very first start your computer. It's usually like delete or F2 or something like that, or F1 keys will be the ones that allow you to actually access your BIOS screens and everything. And then once you're in there, you mostly just use the arrow keys on the keyboard to navigate around, and you'll see something that says most BIOS have a special key you can press to select the boot device, and all of them have a special key to enter the BIOS configuration screen, from which you can define the boot order. So it says depending on the BIOS, their special keys can be escape, F1, F2, F8, F10, F11, F12, or delete. So that's all the possible options. Most commonly it'll be either escape, F1, delete, F12, stuff like that. I've seen some that are these other ones, but it's not as common. And it says that information is usually briefly written on the screen during the boot sequence. So yeah, when you first start your computer, you will see that almost all the time. You will see something. It'll say, press F1 to enter setup, or it'll say press delete to it'll say press delete for more options, or it'll say something to where it'll clue you into the fact that you can press that button and it will give you additional options besides the normal booting process. And it says if you're on a Mac, is keep your finger pressed on the Alt or Option key after hearing the boot sound. So it says the Linux Mint ISO can be booted in both in EFI or BIOS mode. In EFI mode, it shows a grab menu, and BIOS mode, it shows an ISO Linux menu. So yeah, this will be more for this normally will be for when you already have Linux installed. You'll see this screen if there's two operating systems, and this is what the screen where you can choose, like, okay, I want to boot to Linux or I want to boot to Windows if you're doing a dual boot or that sort of thing. Otherwise, this one will be more common when you first do it. It says for one of these menus, press Enter to start Linux Mint from your USB. So it gives you some general guidance, but it's going to be a little bit specific to your actual machine as far as what buttons to press to get into the BIOS. And the BIOS, it just stands for Basic Input Output System. It's an acronym. You can click here and it'll take you to Wikipedia and tell you all about it. But it's basically like the computer's very fundamental, rudimentary screen that you see. That it's before the operating system even starts. It's like these are the basic things that my computer can do, function with. So it sets like your clock, your internal clock, for the the motherboard or whatever. The boot priority, like, okay, first boot from USB, then boot from the hard drive, second if you can't boot from USB, or that sort of thing. There's all kinds of settings in there, and you don't want to go messing around in there too much, because there are some things that you could potentially cause some problems for your machine if you play around things that you're not familiar with. But in this case, you just want to find the boot order, the boot priority, the startup order, whatever words that they use in your particular BIOS to describe the booting process. Like, what device should I boot from first is basically what your computer's asking with this with the boot order section. So, and then you pretty much want to direct it to say check the DVD drive first, or check USB first. And if you don't find anything from those, then the second choice is the hard drive, or whatever. And that's all you're really setting in the boot priority, the boot order section. That's really all you need to do. And once you've set that, it's okay to leave it at that, because then if there's not something for it to boot from USB or whatever, it will just move on to the hard drive. So, which is the normal operation. And you can always go back in and change it back too later on if you want to. So,
if you enjoyed this video and you want to learn even more, you can find my books at bookstoread.com/Jonathan. That's books, the number 2, read.com/JONATHAN.